Hey everyone, I'm All Things Heroes, and today I'm going to go over how I would make Phase 2 of the MCU if Marvel never sold their rights. Before I get into that though, I want to apologize for the long wait. I've had school, and really planning this out takes a lot longer than I thought it would. That is also why I'm going to be splitting this up into multiple parts. I still don't know how many parts, because this part has 4 movies, and I'm still not close to being finished. But let's get straight into this. Phase 2 would start with X-Men. The X-Men would consist of Jean, Scott, Storm, Colossus, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Jubilee, Iceman, and Beast, as well as Professor X, but he's not really an X-Men, he's just, you know. The villains would be the Brotherhood of Mutants, which would be the same team that was in Weapon X, with Juggernaut added. The movie would start off where Weapon X left off at, the post-credit scene of Weapon X. Logan walking around, wondering where he was before being approached by Cyclops, who would pull him off into a room with Jean and Professor X, who would explain everything that happened. Logan wouldn't pay much attention though, and would mostly focus on Jean, kind of setting up a dynamic between them two. Logan would make a remark about how good Jean looks, which upset Scott, and that would lead into an argument between the both of them. Professor X would stop it and ask Jubilee and Nightcrawler to tour Logan around. While they're touring Logan, we're introduced to most of the other X-Men, Storm, Colossus, Iceman, and Beast. They're all doing team training, and we get introduced to their abilities, their names, and a little bit about them. Logan, Jubilee, and Kurt would observe the training. They tell Logan how much of an honor it is to be an X-Men, and only the best of the best get to be an X-Men. Logan wouldn't seem really impressed and would say they look like a bunch of idiots in colorful costumes, and the X-Men wouldn't wear the black leather in this movie because I really think that's stupid, and they would wear their iconic X-Men costumes, so like their Jim Lee costumes. I'm trying to think of an example. X-Men 97, they would wear those costumes. A student would come in after Logan says they look like a bunch of idiots in costumes, and tell the X-Men they need to check the news. The X-Men, along with Kurt, Jubilee, and Logan, would go upstairs and listen to the TV, where the president would announce the Sentinel Project. The Sentinel Project would come into effect because of the events in Weapon X. The president would explain that they need to control individuals like this, and it's a project they've been working on for years. Then the camera would pan to Professor X, and he would just say Eric before cutting to the Brotherhood of Mutants. They would be watching the press conference, I guess, as well, when Eric would get upset and say that they've needed to hide for so long, and would tell the rest of the Brotherhood that they're going to destroy the Sentinels and kill the president. The X-Men would know what Magneto would is gonna do, and because they know how Eric thinks, or they don't really know, but Professor X does. The X-Men would suit up, and Logan wouldn't want to go with them, but he hates people that are against mutants more than he dislikes the X-Men at that point. The X-Men would arrive at the White House at around the same time as the Brotherhood of Mutants would. Professor X would try to de-escalate the situation but Magneto would wrap a piece of metal around his mouth and tell him to shut up for once in his life. This would enrage Scott, who would use his optic blast on Magneto. At this point, Scott is still, how do I explain it? He's still like a suck up to Professor X. He'll do whatever Professor X tells him to do, because this is still pretty early on in the X-Men's career. This is probably maybe a couple months in, maybe a year or two in. Anywhere in that range would be where this X-Men movie would start. The Sentinels would also arrive to take out both of the mutant sides, because the public nor the government knows that there are two separate parts of the mutants, like the Magneto side and the Professor X side. So they don't know that, and and the Sentinels are there to just take care of mutants, not specifically X-Men or the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood would attack the Sentinels. Like, they would mostly focus on the Sentinels, but they would also attack the X-Men. Professor X would use his telepathic abilities to talk to Cyclops, Wolverine, and Colossus to focus on Magneto, while the rest of the X-Men take on the Brotherhood, because he still has the metal around his mouth. He can't really get it off. And Colossus throws Wolverine at Magneto, like the little cannonball move that they do. I'm pretty sure that the first time it was used against the Sentinel, but I'm changing that up a bit and using it against Magneto. We know Wolverine is made out of metals, or adamantium, so he would just get swept away by Magneto. And he would also send Colossus into the White House, because he's also made out of metal. Cyclops would try to use his optic blast on Magneto, but he would use a magnetic field so the blast couldn't reach him. Magneto would control the Sentinels to basically demolish the X-Men, where he almost succeeds. And at this point, Magneto is not a known person, so they wouldn't make Sentinels out of something that was metal. So they almost succeed in killing all the X-Men, but the X-Men are too powerful and overpower the Sentinels. Beast would take manual control over the Sentinels and take one Sentinel and start beating the others. But by the time that all the other Sentinels are down, the Brotherhood is already inside the White House, and Magneto is about to kill the president for his order to hunt mutants down. Nightcrawler would pop the X-Men in the White House, and this wouldn't just be like he grabs everyone and they poof in there. Kurt has never done anything like that, so it would take some convincing from somebody like Jubilee or Logan even to tell him, you can do this, you know? And so they're in the little main office. I don't know what it's called or if it has a name, but the main office of the White House, that little place where we see in the movies, that. They would protect the president, and I forgot to mention that she's also in here. Kitty Pryde, or Shadowcat, is also part of this X-Men. Kitty would get the helmet off of Magneto, while Colossus and Iceman took the helmet off of Juggernaut. Both Professor X and Jean would mentally disable them for now, and the rest of the X-Men would take out the Brotherhood. The president would thank the X-Men, then we'd see the X-Men get medals of honor for defending the president, and even though they did this, many humans would still hate them for existing just because of the natural danger that mutants possess. The president, however, wouldn't shy away from the Sentinel program. He would still use them, but he would repurpose them for mutant threats and not just to find humans. After that, Professor X would visit Magneto at a prison. He wouldn't say anything. They just played chess. Kind of like when Magneto lost his powers, but they played chess and he kind of moved with his powers. Something like that, but there's no, like, I move it with my power scene. The movie would end, but in an end credit scene, when you see Logan leaving the X-Men, only saying bye to Jubilee and Kurt, because that's kind of the only X-Men he really had a real connection to. He did interact with Jean a bit, and he also interacted with Cyclops, but those two were the ones he really had a connection with. Cyclops would see Logan leave on his bike and run after him, but the movie would end, like, Cyclops running after him. It wouldn't, like, he wouldn't say anything, he'd just run after him, and the movie ends. The next movie in Phase 2 would be Iron Man 2, and like the last Iron Man movie, I wouldn't change much, except the introduction of Black Widow, because she was already an Avengers Assemble. I also wouldn't have War Machine and Iron Man go against each other at all, and he'd only get the suit in around the third act. I think that a good thing is to include War Machine here, and I think the villains were pretty good. I think that they could be written better, maybe change the actor a bit, but all in all, I think it's pretty good. This movie would have a post-credit scene, and it would have War Machine become Iron Patriot. I really like Iron Man 2 as well. I like all of the Iron Man movies except Iron Man 3. So that's one that I will change up a bit. But I don't really see a need to change Iron Man 1 or 2 because, in my opinion, those are perfect movies for Iron Man. So, yeah. The movie after Iron Man 2 would be Ant-Man and the Wasp, getting a movie way before they originally did. Because they're main members of the Avengers. I know that their role was kind of small in Avengers Assemble, but I still think that they're pretty prominent members of the Avengers. This movie, however, would be very different from the first Ant-Man and the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie. The main villain would be Egghead here. Kind of what sets him on this path was that he was fired by Hank Pym He's fired by Hank Pym for doing illegal experiments on people with the Mind Stone. The Mind Stone is the thing that Loki had in his scepter, and Pym Tech, I think it's Pym Tech, or it might be Pym Industries, but I think it's Pym Tech. They would take the scepter and kind of do experiments on it, try to figure out how it works. But Egghead, he would use it for illegal experiments. Egghead would try to break into Pym Tech to steal the Mind Stone, where he would be successful, and Hank, this is after he got fired, by the way. Hank would spend hours upon hours looking for him because he knows how dangerous this guy is without the Tesseract. Sorry, not the Tesseract, the Mind Stone. But with the Mind Stone, he's going to be infinitely more powerful. Dennis suggests they get help from Bill Foster, but Hank completely dismisses it and doesn't put it in the realm of possibility because of how big the fallout between Bill and Hank is. I'm kind of including a couple elements from Ant-Man and the Wasp into this. I think that this makes the story a bit better, having Bill in here. And, Bill and Hank had fallen out over company reasons. But yeah, Janet wouldn't really listen to Hank, because even though Hank is her husband and he's the one that knows more about this kind of stuff, she knows how stubborn he is, and he'll never ask for help no matter how much he needs it. So she still goes and asks Bill for help. She tells him that Hank asked for Bill's help, but couldn't ask him himself because he was still looking for Egghead. Bill was skeptical because he also knows Hank would never ask for help, but a part of Bill wanted to believe it, so he went anyway. When Hank sees Bill show up, he asks him what he's doing there. It kind of blows up at Bill and Janet. Bill explains everything that Janet told him, and Hank would respond by saying Bill should know he'd never asked for help. And Bill's response would be he wanted to believe Hank would, and that he grew up. He would say he grew up to kind of like be a bit more rude because they're still not on great terms, you know. The three would find Egghead, and Hank would give Bill a suit he was working on. It'd be a pre-Giant Man suit, but so he can't shrink, can only grow and go to normal size. Ant-Man, the Wasp, and as Bill would call himself, Goliath, would all attack Egghead. Bill wouldn't go into his full Goliath form yet, and Egghead with the power of the Mind Stone would overpower all the three of them and almost kill them. But they find a way to overpower the weapon Egghead is using to harness the Mind Stone's power. Goliath also goes full size, which gets to the overpowering him. The weapon would be a different version of Loki's scepter, so it'd be made out of Uru, something that nobody thought of using in this universe. So you make Uru's staff with the Mind Stone in the middle, or like at the helm of it. The blast of the weapon exploding would be so close to Egghead that it would kill him, or we think it kills him, and the other three would get hurt, but they would walk away with minor injuries. This movie also wouldn't get a post-credit scene because I don't think one is necessary, although if I had to put one, it'd probably just be locking away the Mind Stone. So, the fourth movie in Phase 2 would be Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This is also a movie that I really love, and I keep it relatively the same, with the only changes being that Bucky would remember Cap sooner, and they would team up on someone like Crossbones, who would be kind of like the main villain here and not the Winter Soldier. So he would probably remember middle of the second act or something, or end of the second act and the third act. They would do that. Falcon would still be here, and Black Widow would also be here. They would try to stop random agents and the exploding of the helicarrier. The four would win, and it would let this Winter Soldier be a free man. Not actually, he wouldn't actually be a free man in the eyes of the public, but Captain America and let him go because he hoped he'd go off to somewhere like Romania or something. The love story of Black Widow and Captain America would also be explored here because I think it makes more sense than Hulk and Natasha. And the post-credit scene would be Shield bringing in the Tesseract and attempting to keep it safe from Hydra's hands, which is also pretty important. The next movie would be TASM, so The Amazing Spider-Man 1. This movie wouldn't have MJ in it. It would be Gwen, like the actual Amazing Spider-Man movies. The main villain would be changed to Doc Ock because I think it's a better story that could be told with Doc Ock. This would also be an origin story and would feature Harry Osborn, Flash Thompson, and Norman Osborn would also be here. Norman is somebody that wasn't really explored at all in the TASM universe, which I think is a huge miss, but, maybe they could have survived if they used him. But the movie starts off the same way that TASM does, but instead of Peter breaking into Oscorp to see Gwen and finding Dr. Connors, he would find Dr. Octavius. Doc Ock would get fired at, a bit later into the film, or end of the first act, and would ask help to work on a machine with him. Peter asks him why he got fired, and he gives a plain answer and says budget cuts, and this response isn't true, but Peter believes it and would agree to helping him out, and he would also get closer to Gwen and tell her that he was working on the project with Dr. Otto Octavius. Gwen would tell him the real reason Doc Ock got fired, and the reason was that whenever he put the mechanical arms on, he would get aggressive. When the project was canceled, he trashed the lab. Peter would then understand some things that didn't make sense with the mechanical arms, some of the data, a little bit of the way that Doc Ock was acting, and Peter then told Gwen that he was Spider-Man, kind of in a rush, kind of like he did at the rooftop, we'll say. They would share a kiss before Peter swung off to find Doc Ock, who had the arms on. They'd fight across the city, and NYPD would get involved, and Captain Stacy would die after getting involved as well, and Peter would reveal himself to him, which leads to Captain Stacy making him promise to stay away from Gwen. Now, I didn't mention this earlier on, but Uncle Ben does die, and he dies in the same way, but at this point, Peter's already Spider-Man, but he's kind of like an early Green Arrow. He's doing it for fun and not because he has to. So when Uncle Ben dies, he realizes that, I have to do this to keep people safe, and he's not able to do that when Captain Stacy dies. So he feels like he's letting down Uncle Ben, who, instead of saying with great power comes great responsibility, in the car or at the house like TASM and the original Spider-Man trilogy did it, I would have it be while he's dying, because somehow Uncle Ben knew. Uncle Ben somehow knew that Pete was a web-slinging guy, and Spider-Man would end up defeating Doc Ock. He wouldn't kill him, but he would be very close to do it out of anger, and Doc Ock would just go to prison. The last part of the movie would be Peter telling Gwen he has to stay away from her, but eventually changes his mind. And that's all I have for Phase 2, Part 1. Thank you everyone for watching, and I am very sorry about how it took me 2 months to come out with Phase 2, but before I work on the rest of Phase 2, I am going to divert and work on how I would make a DC universe if they started before Marvel, or they started in the same year as Marvel, but they had started instead of Marvel. It's a bit confusing, but basically I'm going to be replacing the MCU with the DCU. And I'm going to kind of work on phase 1 soon, and hopefully I can work on both simultaneously, and this kind of MCU thing will conclude soon, or you know what I'm trying to say. But bye everyone, and please come back and don't abandon this channel, even though it might be 3 months until my next post.